Hello, Chacruna audience. This is Bia Labate, Executive Director of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines, and we continue to blog from Awakened Futures here in San Francisco. You can check out the Awakened Futures Summit. Here we are on the hall. People are walking around. The lectures are happening. And I have here a distinguished speaker, MD, PhD. His name is Rael Cahn, and he's going to talk about the neurophysiology of meditative and psychedelic states. A lot of big words there. Thank you, Rael. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a psychiatrist and neuroscientist. I work at USC in Los Angeles. Clinically, I work in the LA County USC Medical Center in the Psychiatric Emergency Room. And research-wise, I work with the Brain and Creativity Institute at USC, doing work on the neurophenomenology of transformations of consciousness, so meditation, psychedelics, and other related disciplines.
Awesome. So a scientist of consciousness. What does a scientist of consciousness do? What kind of research do you do? And I can hold the mic, don't worry.
Okay, so currently I'm doing a study with long-term meditators, bringing them in 2 separate days, one for EEG and one for fMRI, looking at the neurophenomenologic signatures of narrative-free awareness. So when the internal dialogue stops, what's happening in the brain as measured by these 2 tools, EEG and fMRI, and then doing the same paradigm with non-meditators, and comparing and contrasting, these 2 groups as to what their brains look like when they attempt to meditate or let the mind go open, free, versus engage in thinking. That's one study. And another couple of studies on meditation as an intervention for addiction and depression and what brain mechanisms are engaged in association with the beneficial or non-beneficial effects of meditation, for those kinds of issues.
Wait a minute. Just for the general public that don't know all of this, can you explain what is EEG and fMRI? Can you tell how does the study is for a layperson?
Yeah, EEG is the electroencephalogram. So that's looking at the electrical output of the cortex primarily, which is always generating electromagnetic waves related to its function, and we get very good temporal precision with EEG. Every millisecond, a new data point is coming in from all the electrodes. I usually use 64 electrodes when I'm recording people's brains, although you can also use 1 or 20 or what have you. fMRI allows you to look deeper into the brain, but to be very diffuse in your temporal precision. So it allows you to look at functional magnetic resonance imaging, allows you to look at where in the brain is the blood flowing to, using the kind of the known, where the water goes, the blood follows, So when using the fMRI, we get every second or 2 seconds a data point about not just what's happening in the cortex, but even deep in the brain, the limbic areas, the brain stem, the thalamus. So what areas are more or less using blood, and averaging over a second or 2.
So you put people to meditate and you kind of measure their brain, and there's a lot of specific vocabulary there, but what are your findings?
Well, one of the prominent findings is the more practiced somebody is with meditation, the more their brain changes when they practice. If you compare that brain state when they're practicing to when they're attempting to, maintain an everyday mind, like a kind of thinking about stuff, ruminating or, wandering around in thinking of the past and the future and not being present. So there's some expertise that develops. And then, of course, what's interesting is, the baseline brain state also seems to change in meditators, so that even when they're not meditating, if you don't tell them what to do, they'll probably look a little bit like they're meditating all the time, because they have they've driven the brain, through their awareness and their focusing of attention to be functioning in a different way at baseline as a trait level.
Let me see if I understand. You could say that this is maybe some kind of art or discipline, let's say, maybe making an analogy to the world of sports, that you train yourself and you get that discipline and you sort of shape your body and your mind to be in that state. Is it something along those lines?
Yeah, body and mind and brain, not just brain, but body and brain. Our brain is part of the body. So awareness itself shifts, and as awareness shifts, the brain and body follow. Yeah.
And what are the implications of this, or why is this cool, or why does this even matter?
Well, the implications are that we have the capacity as human beings to totally transform our world. You know, like the world that we experience is not a given. We are constructing it actively as we go through life. And it's possible through awareness training that you can choose to do anytime and anywhere, now and then, and tomorrow. You know, you can do that and change the way your brain is perceiving reality in ways that allow access towards a deep sense of, first, awakened futures, awakeness, but also some of the component processes of non-reactivity, non-judgmentality, and ultimately opening of the heart, the experience that one is not even separate from the world, not observing the world. The observer and observed collapse into one, and one starts experiencing a sense that all is one is all, and there is no distinction or separation, boundarylessness.
Is this like the scientist talking, or is this like the man talking? Are you also engaged in these things? Are you talking firsthand experience?
Yeah, I got into this because of firsthand experience, and then I became very curious as to, was this just me? Or does everyone have this capacity, as it seemed to me was the case? And the more science has evolved in the last 18 years since I started looking at, meditators as well as people taking psychedelics, the data is clear that these two different technologies of change both engender the capacity for this shift of consciousness that I'm referring to, which I originally explored just experientially because, that's what happened to me. I did that, or it did me. And, I became very curious about that.
So to conclude, we're talking about awakened futures and maybe new utopias or new hopes or new dreams or new possible ways for the mind and consciousness and our global planet. Do you really believe in that, or is this a little bit naive and kind of a lot of wealthy people from the first world kind of wishing that technology and meditation and psychedelics will really help us change the future of the planet? Where do you stand?
I reserve judgment on that matter. I do believe that, even before technologies of the kind of physical sort, the silicon-based sort, came around that allowed for things like EEG or fMRI recordings of the brain, the technologies of spiritual transformation have been recorded and written about and explored by our human family for thousands of years. And in that particular sense, I have a real sense of possibility for humanity. And I'm also very aware, I'm a psychiatrist, and I studied in Zurich for part of my PhD, looking at psilocybin in the brain and consciousness. And one of the people who used to run that hospital was Bleuler. He defined schizophrenia. And then after Bleuler was Jung, who talked about the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious is, already pointing towards the notion that we are living in a noosphere, a sphere of consciousness as human beings that we can tap into. Even if we never saw the snake, it will come to us in a dream, and it is like, well, where did that snake come from? It comes from the fact, in my humble opinion, that Jung may have been right, that there's a repository, the Indians might have called it the Akashic Records, but there's a repository of where human consciousness has gone in the past and present that is available to all of us, each of our individual consciousnesses.
All right, I'm an anthropologist, and we like medical doctors and psychiatrists that are into mysticism and are into philosophical, ontological, epistemological explorations of the human mind. They are just not attached to molecules and active principles, but that actually take those things and go down on the ground, try it on themselves, and publish that research. Thank you very much for your work. Keep on tuned. Follow us here. We're going to keep on blogging from the Awakened Futures in San Francisco, California. Big hug from Bia Labate and all the Chacruna team.